Critics hated Jumanji, but Robin Williams definitely got the last laugh. Jumanji turns 30 years old this month, so here are some things I bet you never knew about it. The story behind Jumanji starts at the University of Michigan in 1968. Future author and illustrator Chris Van Allsburg wasn't interested in art as a kid, but in his freshman year at University of Michigan, he enrolled in a drawing class and he found his calling. After graduating with a BFA, he'd get a master's in sculpting in 1975. And then he opened his own sculpting studio, but it wasn't going all that well, so Van Allsburg's wife Lisa suggested that he turn his private sketches into a children's book. So in 1979, Van Allsburg published his first book, The Garden of Abdul Ghazazi. It became a bestseller and a Caldecott Award runner-up, setting him on a new career path. For his next picture book, Van Allsburg wanted to create intentionally incongruous images that would evoke the feeling of cognitive dissonance, which led him to imagine wild animals in a family living room. He was also thinking about board games and how they rely on the player's imagination. So he thought, what if there was a board game that didn't require any imagination because it was actually happening in front of you? Combining these two ideas led to Jumanji, a jungle board game that came to life. Van Allsburg made up the name Jumanji because it sounded slightly exotic and evoked the idea of the jungle. His book is only 31 pages and it tells a simpler story than the movie. Siblings Judy and Peter find the Jumanji board game in the park. They take it home and play while their parents are away. Their house is soon overtaken by jungle animals, but ultimately they finish the game as the rules require and return the game to the park. The movie, meanwhile, takes place over 2 generations and added the idea of a boy getting stuck in the game for decades. Anyway, Van Allsburg published Jumanji in 1981 to great success. It won the Caldecott Award for Best Picture Book in 1982. The author would then continue to publish picture books throughout the 80s and 90s, including his biggest hit, The Polar Express, in 1985. So of course, Hollywood was interested in working with him. In the early 90s, his editor suggested he take a meeting with Sony Pictures and its CEO, Peter Gruber, which resulted in Sony optioning the rights to Jumanji for a feature film. Van Allsburg told Time in 2017, the studio then commissioned a few screenplay drafts from other writers, but they weren't happy with how they turned out and almost abandoned the project. So the author took it among himself to write out some ideas. And Sony liked his treatment, so it allowed him to write a screenplay draft. Van Allsburg's version of the movie script had an air of mystery and surrealism that was later dropped. But his script eventually became the version that was filmed after many rewrites, so that resulted in the author getting a story by credit on the movie. Sony then hired Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and the Rocketeer filmmaker Joe Johnston to direct. And Jonathan Hensley, Greg Taylor, and Jim Strain contributed those aforementioned rewrites. Tom Hanks and Bruce Willis were reportedly both considered for Alan, but according to Johnston in the New York Times Oral History of Jumanji, Sony's TriStar Pictures division would only greenlight the movie if Robin Williams agreed to star. Robin initially turned it down as he wasn't happy with the script, so Johnston and the writers pulled an all-nighter editing the screenplay, and Robin liked the changes enough to say yes. Johnston was a bit worried about Robin improvising too much on set, but the actor understood it was a tightly structured story, and they ultimately reached a compromise on set, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Future Broadway star Laura Bell Bundy played young Sarah, aka Bonnie Hunt. Scarlett Johansson auditioned for the role of Judy Shepard, but it went to Kirsten Dunst, who was 13 years old at the time. Bradley Pierce played her younger brother, Peter. He was most famous for voicing Chip in Beauty and the Beast, and Tails in the 1993 Sonic the Hedgehog series. The Hunter was offered to Tim Curry at first, but he passed, so Jonathan Hyde was cast instead. And then when they couldn't find anyone else to play Alan's dad, they gave Jonathan Hyde that part as well. Sony set the budget at $65 million, which would be $140 million today. Filming began on November 14th, 1994. Jumanji shot partially in New England and the rest in Vancouver. Keene, New Hampshire stood in for the fictional town of Brantford, while the Old Woolen Mill in North Berwick, Maine was the Paris Shoe Factory. The town of Keene gave Robin Williams the keys to the city in 1994, and it kept the Paris Shoes sign up for at least 20 years. In 2014, after Robin Williams' death, it became a makeshift memorial where people left flowers and candles. It's unclear if the Paris Shoe sign is still up in Keene, so if you live there, let me know. In Vancouver, the crew built a mock-up of the parish house, and they shot the entire Sir Save-A-Lot sequence at the Delta Fair Mall and Liquidation World in Tsawwassen, British Columbia. As for Robin's improvising, he and Joe Johnston agreed that they'd shoot every scene as written, and then Robin would get a second take to improvise as much as he'd like. Bradley Pierce said he didn't understand what Robin was talking about a lot of the time. Quote, he would go on these Ethel Merman riffs where he would sing all his lines like her. It was hysterical, but I didn't realize he was imitating a real person. Robin and Bonnie Hunt would also improvise between camera setups to keep up their energy and make the crew laugh. But that's not all. Jonathan Hyde said every Monday night, Robin went to a comedy club in Vancouver and did an hour and a half of improv with the locals, and then an hour and a half of solo stand-up. 3 hours of burning off excess steam. He was glorious. Johnston said he was a bit put off by Bonnie Hunt's performance on the first day of filming. He didn't get why she was acting so over the top, but once she explained to him that her character was traumatized by her past, it all made sense. Jumanji required a ton of special effects. There were no live animals on set. Instead, they used puppets and animatronics, while ILM carried out digital effects in post. Laura Bell Bundy recalled a mechanical bat that had been named Ito after the judge in the O.J. Simpson trial. For the stampede, the crew rigged up a hydraulic ram to launch a steel rhinoceros through the wall of the library. The steel rhino was then replaced by CGI animals in post. After he was transformed into part monkey, Bradley Pierce had to undergo 3.5 hours of prosthetic makeup every day over the course of 2 months of filming. While filming the scene where the monkeys steal a police car, stuntwoman Betty Thomas Quee lost control of the car and hit a tree at 60 miles per hour. Luckily, she wasn't injured, but Joe Johnston had to plead with the paparazzi who filmed the accident not to release it to the news. Jonathan Hyde called it a strange shoot and a bit of a drag shooting in the wet, cold Vancouver in the middle of winter. Filming wrapped in April 1995. As a wrap gift, Robin gave the cast hardbound copies of the script, and he signed them all with a personal message. ILM then had to create 2 new software programs for the VFX on Jumanji. iSculpt, which allowed the illustrators to create realistic facial expressions on CG animals, and another one that for the first time created realistic digital hair used on the monkeys and lion. The rhino that lags behind the rest of the stampede was actually an animation error, but they decided to leave it in and add some wheezing sounds to justify its delay. Visual effects supervisor Stephen L. Price ended up dying before the movie's release, so the film is dedicated in his honor. Jumanji opened on 2,500 screens December 15th, 1995, earning $11 million opening weekend. Audiences gave it an A- Cinemascore in theater exit polls, but critics didn't really like it. Today, 53% of the 49 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive, and it's got a 41 on Metacritic. Critics found that the film prioritized visual effects over storytelling. Roger Ebert gave it 1.5 stars out of 4, saying it was too violent for children. But here's the thing, despite those mixed reviews, Jumanji was a crowd pleaser, and it stayed in the top 10 at the box office until February. It ultimately grossed $262 million worldwide, 4 times its budget, and then it became a long-running millennial favorite for years to come on VHS and DVD. Jonathan Hyde says, "People between 25 and 35 come up to me and say, 'You scared the hell out of me when I was a kid.' I have to say that's usually quite gratifying." In 2005, Jumanji was listed 48th in Channel 4's documentary, The 100 Greatest Family Films. Jumanji spawned a playable, non-magical board game and a computer game in 1996. In 2011, Robin Williams recorded a new audio version of Van Allsburg's original book. The movie was adapted into an animated series on UPN in 1996, which ran for 40 episodes across 3 seasons, ending in 1999. It featured the voices of Bill Fagerbakke, Ashley Johnson, and Pamela Adlon, and ironically, Tim Curry as Trader Slick. In 2002, Van Allsburg wrote a sequel book to Jumanji called Zathura, which has the same concept, but instead of a jungle board game, it's a space game. So, after Chris Van Allsburg's The Polar Express was adapted into a movie in 2004, Sony made a Zathura movie in 2005, directed by Jon Favreau, starring Josh Hutcherson, Dax Shepard, and Kristen Stewart. It flopped at the box office, making $65.1 million against its $65 million budget. But Jumanji still meant something in the culture, and so 22 years after the original film, Sony revived the franchise with 2017's Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle. Set in present day, the board game has now become a video game, and 4 teenagers get sucked into the jungle world, the same one that Alan went to. It was a huge hit, making $962 million against a $90 million budget. So of course, Sony made a sequel, Jumanji: The Next Level, in 2019, which did $801 million against a $130 million budget. Phoebe Newirth reprised her role from the original Jumanji in that sequel. And Sony is now filming a 3rd modern Jumanji movie. It has an anticipated release date of December 11th, 2026. Thanks for watching this video. If you've made it to the end, drop a stampede in the comments. For more movie histories, check out the attached playlist and subscribe to my newsletter for the latest pop culture news.